Hey guys, Miss Fearing here. We're going to go ahead and look at Unit 5, Note 6. We are going to simplify rational expressions. Now, here's what I need from you. This is going to be a longer video. The concepts are things that you know how to do, but you have to do it multiple times. So it's going to take a little bit of time. You need to slow yourself down and really think about what you're doing. So here's the kind of questions you're going to ask yourself. First of all, you need to know if you're going to factor or not. So factor is that x in the box that we've been doing. Anytime you have an x squared, you're going to need to factor. But no matter what, the first thing you always should look for is, do they have a GCF? That's always the first thing you look for, okay? So every single time you're going to ask yourself, do they have a GCF? If they don't, then you're going to go, is there an x squared or a term squared? If there is, then you know you need to use that x and do that factor method, okay? For this, you're gonna need to find excluded values. And excluded values are values that make your denominator or the bottom of your fraction 0, okay? If you plug into your calculator 5 divided by 0, you're gonna get an error, or it's gonna tell you something like, it can't be done, because in math, we cannot divide by 0. It's not a thing. So when you can plug a number in to make your bottom 0, that's called an excluded value. That's a value we cannot have x equal because you can't have 0 in the denominator. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to simplify. You're going to cross off pieces. So basically, if I have an x on top and an x on bottom, well, those are going to cross out because x divided by x is like saying 1. And when we are in math, we usually don't write that 1 down. It just is a non-existent imaginary 1 there. So you're going to cross off pieces that are the same. So let's kind of look at what all of this means in an actual example. Here's what I have. I have n squared minus 36 divided by n squared plus n minus 30. Now, usually what people want to do is they, oh, this is easy. I can do n squared and I can cross off n squared because there's an n squared on top and an n squared on bottom. You got to stop, okay? When you see problems like this, you need to think of it as a top and a bottom. They're two separate pieces. So if I were just to give you the top, if I were just to give you n squared minus 36, first thing you would ask yourself is there a GCF? In this problem, there's not. So what you're going to do then is you're going to set up your x, okay? Because it's got an n squared. So since it has an n squared, I know I'm going to have to factor this. So this is really saying n squared plus 0n minus 36. So that negative 36 is the top number, 0 on the bottom. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 36 and add or subtract to 0. Well, I know that 6 and negative 6 work. So before you wrote this all down, you had n squared minus 6n plus 6n minus 36, and now we're going to do our box. Okay, so now we're going to plug everything in, n squared, 6n, negative 6n, negative 36. Pull out those GCFs, and you're going to end up with the top being written as n plus 6 and minus 6. Okay, so all I did, that whole top is all I worked with right now. So I have n plus 6 on the top and n minus 6 on the top. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at the bottom of this equation. I have n squared plus n minus 30. We're going to deal with that as a separate problem. So I'm going to say to myself, okay, is there a GCF? No, there's not. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up, because there's an n squared, I need to factor. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a times c on the top, b on the bottom. So two numbers that multiply to negative 30, add or subtract to 1. I know I have 6 and negative 5. So I can rewrite that as n squared plus 6n minus 5n minus 30, and now I can do my box. So plug in what you know, and then remember you need to pull those GCFs out. So n squared and negative 5n have an n in common, 6n and negative 30 have a 6, 6n and n squared have an n, and negative 30 and negative 5n have a negative 5. So that would give me n plus 6, n minus 5. And again, that was the bottom of my denominator. So I'm going to have n plus 6, n minus 5. So here's my fraction that I have. I went from this thing that needed to be factored, and I factored it. So what you have to do first then is I need to find my excluded values. So we call those EV. Okay, and to find your EVs, I'm going to do some side work over here. To find your EVs, what you're going to do is you're going to take what's in the denominator of your fraction. So I have an n plus 6 and I have an n minus 5. Now, we can't have 0 in the denominator, so we have to set them equal to 0 to figure out what they would be. So if I want to solve this for n, I would subtract 6 from both sides. So n would equal negative 6. N equaling negative 6 would make a 0 in the denominator. Same thing here, to get that negative 5 over, I would add 5. So n equaling 5 would make a 0 in our denominator. So our excluded values, our n cannot equal negative 6 or 5. Okay, so that's one point that I'm looking for on your quiz. Now we still need to simplify this fraction right here that we've been dealing with. If you have a factor, something in parentheses that's the same on top and the same on bottom, then we can cross it off. So I have an n plus 6 on top that I can cross off with an n plus 6 on the bottom. I have an n minus 6 on top and an n minus 5 on bottom. They're not the same. So that is going to stay exactly like I see it, n minus 6 on top, n minus 5 on bottom, and then that would be the second part of my answer that I'm looking for. So these problems get long, there's a lot going on, but they're definitely things that you know how to do. We've taught you how to do each of them piece by piece. You just have to slow yourself down and take your time. Let's look at this next example. So example number 2, I have x squared plus x minus 20 on top divided by 5x plus 25 on the bottom. So I'm going to look just at the top right now. I have x squared plus x minus 20. First things first, do I have a GCF? In this situation, I do not. So since I see an x squared, I know that I'm going to have to factor this. So I have a negative 20 on top and a 1 on the bottom. Well, if I do this, I know that 5 times negative 4 will work. So I'm going to write that out as x squared plus 5x minus 4x minus 20. And I'm going to do my box method. Plug in your values. And now we're going to take out our GCF. So x squared and negative 4x have an x. 5x and negative 20 have a 5. X squared and 5x have an x. Negative 4x and negative 20 both have a negative 4. So my top would be x plus 5, x minus 4. So that's the top of this fraction, x plus 5, x minus 4. Now we're going to deal with the bottom. So the bottom is telling me 5x plus 25. So GCF, well, 5 and 25, I know that I can divide both of these by 5. So I would end up writing that as 5 times x plus 5. Looking at this, there is no x squared, so I don't have to go any further with this. This is the bottom of my fraction, and I'm done. So now we have to find those EVs. So I'm going to look at the denominator and do some side work over here. What's in the denominator right now is this 5 times x plus 5. So the only thing I have to deal with is I have to figure out what x cannot equal. So I'm only looking at the piece that has the x with it, and so that's x plus 5. I'm going to set that equal to 0, and I'm going to solve. So I'm going to subtract 5. So this is telling me if x equals negative 5, my denominator would be 0. So I have to say that x cannot equal negative 5. So that's my EV. Since that's the only thing in my denominator, I'm only going to have that 1x as an excluded value. Now we're going to go through and we're going to simplify. So anything that's the same parenthesis on top that it is on the bottom, we can cross off. So I have an x plus 5 on top and an x plus 5 on the bottom. So what's left is x minus 4 over 5. That would be the second part of my answer. All right, number 3, 2y minus 4 divided by y squared plus 3y minus 10. So I'm going to start with the top, and I'm going to have 2y minus 4. First things first, do they have a GCF? These both do. I have a 2 and a 4, so I can divide both of them by 2. And I'd be left with 2 times y minus 2. So that's going to be the top. I don't have a y squared happening, so I can't do any factoring, so that's it for that. Let's deal with the top now. I have a y squared plus 3y minus 10 These do not have a GCF, so I'm going to go straight into, since I see a y squared, I'm going to factor. I have negative 10 on the top, 3 on the bottom. So I know that 5 times negative 2 will make that all work out. So I'm going to have y squared plus 5y minus 2y minus 10. Set up your box. Plug in what you know. And now pull your GCFs out. So these both have a y in common. Have a 5, a y, and a negative 2. So my denominator would be y plus 5, and then y minus 2. So I'm going to put that on the bottom because that's what I just factored was the bottom of that fraction. So now we need to find our EVs, excluded values. So side work over here, EVs. In the denominator, I have 2 different y's, so I need 2 different EVs. So I have y plus 5 that I'm going to set equal to 0, and I have y minus 2 that I'm going to set equal to 0. If you're starting to see the pattern here, you do not have to go through and show all your work for this, but make sure you understand why it is the way that it is. Okay, so I went through and I solved both of those for y. So my excluded values are y cannot equal negative 5 or 2. Okay, that's the first thing. So now I need to simplify. If the parentheses are the same on top as they are on bottom, I can go ahead and I can cross them off. So I have a y minus 2 on top and a y minus 2 on the bottom, so I can cross that off. And I would be left with 2 on top and y plus 5 on the bottom. Okay, last problem here. So I have these 2 expressions that I'm trying to simplify. So I'm going to write the top one down first. So I have 4a squared minus 4a minus 24. First things first, do they have a GCF? Well, yes, this case they do. They both have a 4 in common. So I'd have 4 times a squared minus a minus 6. Since I have an a squared still happening in there, I have to go ahead and I have to factor. So I'm looking for negative 6 on top, negative 1 on bottom. So 2 numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add or subtract to negative 1 gives me 2 and negative 3. So before I can do that box, we need to go ahead and we need to write that out. So I'd have a squared plus 2a minus 3a minus 6. So now I can do my box. A squared, 2a, negative 3a, negative 6. Pull your GCFs out. And that is my factored, and that's for the top. But don't forget your little sister, okay? We brought her up. We got to bring her back. So I have 4 times a plus 2, a minus 3. Now let's deal with the denominator. I have an a squared plus a 6a plus 8. GCF first. These don't have anything in common. So since I have an a squared, I can go straight into the x. 8 on top, 6 on bottom. I know that 4 and 2 multiply to 8 and add to 6. So I have a squared plus 4a plus 2a plus 8. We're going to plug that into our box. A squared, 4a, 2a, 8. And then pull out your GCF. So I have an a and a 4 and an a and a 2. So that tells me I'm going to have a plus 4, a plus 2. So now we're going to find those EVs. Do my side work over here. EV. The denominator are the only ones we care about. So I have a plus 4 equals 0. And I have a plus 2 equals 0. Solve both of those for a. Okay, and again, if you can do this without writing it all out, that works just fine. That should be a negative 4. So I have a cannot equal negative 4 or negative 2. And now simplify. So I have an a plus 2 on top and an a plus 2 on the bottom that I can cross out. So on top I'll have 4, a minus 3. Over on the bottom I'll have a plus 4. So those would be the 2 things that on a quiz I would be looking for. All right, that's the end of this video. I know that it got long, but this is going to be what we're going to do for the next couple lessons here. So You're going to get a ton of practice. I want you to slowly work through it. You can do this, but stop up if you have any questions.